Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I now call to order this October 3rd, 2018 public hearing to consider a legislative amendment to Chapter 5 of the county's comprehensive plan. Before we begin, I invite you to rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Today we will consider ZDO 270, which is a legislative text amendment to the Clackamas County Comprehensive Plan that will amend certain figures, maps, and tables associated with the Transportation System Plan. The hearing on ZDO 270 will proceed as follows. We will first hear a presentation from Principal Transportation Planner Stephen Williams. Next, I will open the hearing for public testimony, beginning with public officials who will have 5 minutes each. Then representatives from recognized community planning organizations and agencies will have 3 minutes each. Finally, other people wishing to testify will have 3 minutes each. The board will then deliberate and either render a decision today or set a time to make a decision at a later date. Assisting in the hearing today is our clerk, Kevin Moss, Stephen Williams from the Department of Transportation and Development, and Assistant County Counsel Nate Boderman. If you wish to testify, please fill out a green card and give it to Kevin. If you have prepared a written statement, please give a copy to Kevin and use your time to summarize what you have written. Everyone who wishes to speak will have an opportunity to do so. We will now hear from Stephen Williams.
Thank you, Commissioner Humberston. Before we start, I wanted to call your attention to materials that you have received. In your packet is a staff report that was prepared by myself. There is also a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to be going through here in a moment, as well as the staff report that was provided to the Planning Commission for their meeting on September 10th, and a series of related attachments that show all of the changes that are being proposed. In addition, you have also received one letter of comment that we received at the end of last week and was sent out to you as well. So with all of that said, I'll go ahead into my presentation here. Basically, ZDO 270 is updates to figures, maps, and tables in Chapter 5 of the Comprehensive Plan, which is the Transportation System Plan. There are no text amendments proposed here, and the 3 amendments that are opposed are all relatively minor. So, but they all have to be adopted to go into the Transportation System Plan and the Comprehensive Plan. All of the proposed amendments conform with current county practice and do not represent changes in policy. The proposed changes are some minor adjustments to the cross sections in the Transportation System Plan for urban and rural roads that are intended to bring those into conformance with national standards and existing county practice. A readoption of the Southeast 172nd Avenue 190th Drive Corridor Management Plan to be consistent with changes that were made through a joint effort by Happy Valley and county staff, and then splitting one project in the Transportation System Plan project list to enable an applicant to mitigate the traffic impact from a project by building a county priority road improvement. The first amendment is the revised cross sections. In our Transportation System Plan and the Comprehensive Plan, each type of roadway serves different transportation needs and requires different types of facilities. The cross sections that we have in the plan depict the county standards for our policy expectations on the arrangement of the traffic lanes, median, shoulder, bike lanes, curb and stormwater facilities, landscaping, pedestrian facilities, etc. Those adopted cross sections can be modified to fit particular situations, but it is important to have those cross sections because they communicate to the public and to those who own property or those who are doing road improvements what our expectations are. As I noted, these revisions are proposed to fit the adopted national and regional standards and also our existing county practices. The cross-section changes that we're proposing are very specific and focused. We have changed the requirement for back of sidewalk landscape strip. That varied in previous versions, but has been standardized at 6 inches in all cases in these proposed cross sections. We've added 6 inches for curb to the landscape strip and curb, which allows a full, and I made a mistake here, I'm sorry, it should be 5-foot landscape strip, which is consistent with our roadway requirements and other design guidelines. We also have substituted the term as needed in places where the term optional was previously used to make it more clear what our expectations are. We've corrected bikeway width ranges to be consistent with national and regional standards. In the rural cross sections, we've provided flexibility for gravel shoulder width and ditch width to account for the specific needs at particular locations, and we've updated the paving width and right-of-way width to account for all the other changes that impact particular cross-sections. In the second amendment proposal that is before you this morning, we are proposing to modify the Southeast 172nd Avenue, 190th Drive Corridor Management Plan. This particular plan was adopted jointly by Clackamas County and Happy Valley in 2012. It's intended to create the main north-south spine of the transportation system out in the East Happy Valley, Damascus area. The plan creates, really sets forth the planning for a multimodal transportation corridor, and it incorporates improvements for pedestrian, bicycle, and transit modes in addition to the proposed improvements to the roadway. Clackamas County staff and Happy Valley staff worked with the original project consultants to make those minor changes to the adopted plan. And the adopted plan, or the updated plan, I should say, has already been adopted by Happy Valley back in January. In terms of the specific improvements that are being proposed, there is an overview figure that is titled Figure 7-2E, which has been added, and the pagination and table of contents changed to reflect that addition. Strange though it may seem, the original document did not have an overview figure that depicted all of the proposed improvements. And so this was simply an addition intended to make the document easier to work with. There are also revisions to figures 7-1A, 7-1B, 7-2A through D, and 7-3, which were primarily changes to the updated Happy Valley local road network to reflect changes that they made when they updated their TSP. And it also changed the location of the cycle track, which is a type of bicycle facility. Previously, that cycle track had been located immediately at the curb. The proposed changes move it back to the curb, back from the curb, and actually put it behind the landscape strip on several of the cross sections. And there were two main reasons for making that change. One is safety. Putting it behind the landscape strip moves it further away from traffic and increases the safety for the bicyclists on the cycle track. And then the second is maintenance. It turned out that our transportation maintenance department did not have the means to effectively maintain that cycle track when it was right at the back of curb. And so moving it back behind the landscape strip allows the maintenance department to more easily maintain that particular feature. In addition to the changes that I just identified, the City of Happy Valley logo was added to all of the figures, and the adoption date that's shown on the document was revised to January of 2018. The third proposed amendment is to modify Table 5-3C, project number 3029. Now, Table 5-3C is what we call the long-term capital projects table. In the Transportation System Plan, we have 4 different tables of projects. We have the short-term 5-year priority table. We have the 20-year priority table. And both of those first 2 tables are intended to show projects that are priorities for funding within the next 5-year or next 20-year window based on the amount of funds that we expect to have available. Table 3, which is where this project is and is the table that we're proposing to amend, has long-term capital projects that are viewed as priorities, but for which we do not have an identified funding source. And so these are projects that would be moved forward or will be moved forward when funding can be identified for them. Project 3029, in particular, proposes an extension of 79th Avenue from Luther Road south to King Road to create what we were calling in the Transportation System Plan the West 82nd Avenue Parallel Road. And that was intended to improve access for local traffic, pedestrians, and bicyclists in that area without requiring them to go out to 82nd Avenue, Oregon 213, which would both, make their lives easier as well as improving the circulation system in that local area. The Project 3029, as we have it today, was actually in previous versions of the TSP, but it was separated at that point into 2 separate projects, one that extended from Luther Road to Johnson Creek Boulevard, and then a second one that extended from Johnson Creek Boulevard south to King Road. The amendment that's being proposed here would actually split it back into those original 2 segments. And we would call one of those 3029A, which would represent the project, the extension of 79th from Luther Road down to Johnson Creek Boulevard, and 3029B that would represent the extension of 79th from Johnson Creek Boulevard down to King Road. The reason that this is being brought forward at this point is due to the concurrency requirement that we have in our ZDO and Comprehensive Plan and Transportation System Plan. Concurrency assures that transportation system capacity is sufficient to serve proposed development. Applicants, in this case, the applicant is proposing to meet concurrency by providing a voluntary substantial contribution by building the north section of Project 3029 from Luther Road to Johnson Creek Boulevard. The traffic impact, one of the provisions of our concurrency requirement, is that if they choose to go this route and propose a voluntary substantial commitment, it needs to be one that is addressing the traffic impact from the proposed development. And the draft traffic study that we have seen indicates that the traffic impact from the proposed development does not extend south of Johnson Creek Road, or Johnson Creek Boulevard, excuse me. So by splitting number 3029 into 2 segments, we are obtaining funds for the north portion, but we're avoiding asking the applicant to pay for an improvement that is not necessitated by their proposal. When this went to Planning Commission, public notices were provided based on our 35-day legislative amendment notice rule. It was sent to all the cities within the county. It was sent to all the CPOs and the hamlets. It went to DLCD, Metro, ODOT, and other interested agencies. It was published in the newspaper and published on our social media outlets. And as I noted, we've received one comment, and that has been provided to you. At the Planning Commission hearing, there was on September 10th of 2018, there was no testimony received at that time. The main discussion issue at the Planning Commission was related to that third amendment, splitting Project 3029 into two sections. There was a desire on the part of some of the planning commissioners for the entire project to move forward, or at a minimum, that intersection improvements proposed for the intersection of 79th and Johnson Creek Boulevard be constructed due to circulation and safety benefits. Points raised during that discussion included the following: that there was no funding currently prioritized for any of this project, that the traffic proposed from the development will not significantly impact the section of 79th Avenue south of Johnson Creek Boulevard, and that construction of the improvement by the applicant cannot be justified at this time, and that the intersection improvement at 79th Avenue and Johnson Creek Boulevard is actually a priority in our Transportation Safety Action Plan, and our Traffic Safety Division of DTD is currently seeking grant funds to try to fund that improvement. And then a final point that was raised was that while existing pedestrian and bicycle routes south of Johnson Creek Boulevard, such as 82nd, Bell Ave, and the Trolley Trail, are not as direct as the further extension of 79th Avenue would be, all have been recently improved for bicycle and pedestrian safety. And so as a result, constructing only the north end of Project 3029 does not create a safety hazard for pedestrians and bicyclists. So the action by the Planning Commission on the 10th of September was that following discussion, they recommended approval of all three amendments by unanimous 7-0 votes, and they actually voted on all three amendments separately. So the staff recommendation this morning is to replace adopted figures 5-1 A to F, which are the urban cross sections, and 5-2 A to F, which are the rural cross sections, with revised figures 5-1 A to E and figures 5-2 A to E. And those revised, or I guess I should call them red line versions of the proposed cross sections, are found in your packet. We also recommend that you modify or approve modification of Appendix A-.7, the Southeast 172nd Avenue 190th Drive Corridor Management Plan, to incorporate the changes as described, and that you modify Table 5-3 Long-Term Capital Projects and Map 5-11A, which is in your packet, to remove project number 3029 and replace it with two projects. Project 3029A, extending from Luther Road to Johnson Creek Boulevard, and Project 3029B, extending from Johnson Creek Boulevard to King Road, with both of those projects having the same description and characteristics as the original 3029. So that concludes my presentation, but I'd be happy to respond to any questions that members of the board might have at this time, if that's appropriate.
Do any commissioners have questions for staff at this time? Paul?
I do. So, Stephen, looking back at the, I'm looking at slide 3 and 4 as it relates to the First Amendment, and my question is, as it relates to the widths and some of the modifications, understanding that some of this, we got to comply, right, and upgrade, I get that. But I'm curious as to if there's a greater right-of-way needed, acquisition as a result of some of these changes, does require more right-of-way be acquired, and do we have an estimated cost impacts to that for, in general?
It would probably be impossible to do the sort of cost analysis that you're suggesting, just because we don't know exactly where this will end up applying or
Right.
what the projects will be. So it's very difficult to do any sort of specific analysis there.
Right, but will there, and with these changes, will there be more right-of-way needed for these
In
widths?
some cases, not in all. If you look at the diagrams, they each kind of end up having different amounts of change to the overall right-of-way width or to the paving width or even to the features. And so as a result, it's not possible to make a generalization one way or the other. And I mean, one thing you'll notice if you look at the rural cross sections is that originally we were requiring a uniform ditch width of 9 feet and a uniform gravel shoulder width. And these new cross sections recognize that the size, width of the ditch that we need really varies with the features of the area, the hydrologic conditions, the road width, other issues like that. And the same thing holds true with regard to the gravel shoulder. In some places, that full gravel shoulder is necessary because there is no paved shoulder at all. But in other locations, there is some or even a full paved shoulder, and so in those cases, the gravel shoulder width can be minimized. So this actually provides us with more flexibility to deal with the specific issues that arise when we're looking at particular proposals or particular pieces of property.
Right. As it relates to shifting the cycle track from on the other side of the landscape median, is that safe to presume that will require more right-of-way?
No, it's the same amount of right-of-way. We've really just rearranged in the 172nd, 190th plan. We've just kind of rearranged the way those different portions of the cross-section are shown and required, so that whereas the original version had the cycle track immediately behind the curb and then the landscape strip, they've really just been reversed. So we still have the same width of landscape strip, we have the same width of cycle track. That's just that the landscape strip is next to the paved surface of the road now.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Any other questions?
Yes, so why were you concerned about the right-of-way? Because it would make it more difficult to
Right-of-way
move
can
ahead?
be awfully expensive sometimes, and
Okay.
obviously cause delays as well. If you have a non-willing seller, sometimes it just adds, just looking at the overall cost.
Okay, that's what I thought, thanks.
And that's a good concern. And the thing to keep in mind is that our regulations do provide the flexibility to accommodate existing, sort of the existing cross-section that applies on the road. So we don't want to create a scenario where we have a certain length of the road with one cross-section, another segment of the road down here with the same cross-section, and then we have a segment in the center that's significantly wider or narrower, because that actually creates problems for us. So we have the flexibility to match what exists in the immediate area.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would just add to that is that in some of the built environments we already have, people have accesses, secondary accesses, or even sometimes even more than that. And I think some of our allowances will basically cut them off, basically where they lose that access on side roads and corners. I know that in the more of the urban setting, that's a concern, and I know it's a concern for people in the rural area as well.
Yeah, and I think that's an issue that we try to avoid if it comes up, Do you want to address that, Rick, or not? Okay. Rick Nyes, the head of our development review section in transportation, is here and can probably speak to that better than I can.
Hi, Rick Nyes, Development Engineering Supervisor. With development, we do sometimes remove access if they have multiple access points to an arterial or collector road, just to better meet our standards. With capital projects, I'm not exactly sure what our processes are for that, but generally we retain the existing access points. It's when they intensify their development on site, which is when we start looking at the reduction in access.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll now open the hearing for a public comment portion of the hearing, and thank you. Are there any public officials who wish to testify? You would have 5 minutes. Seeing none, are there any representatives from CPOs or agencies that wish to testify? They would have 3 minutes. Likewise, seeing none, we'll now hear testimony from members of the public, and I'll call the names of the people who have submitted green cards, and you will have 3 minutes each. Mr. Andrew Tucker, please join us at the dais.
Good morning, Andrew Tucker. I'm here on behalf of East Bank Development. We support the Planning Commission's recommendation to the board that it adopts Amendment Number 3. We intend to submit for application to develop a 256-unit multifamily. With this amendment, we will be able to construct project number 3029A and meet the county's concurrency requirement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now close the public comment portion of today's hearing and begin deliberation. So, does anyone have any other discussions that they wish to add to this? Hearing and seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
Move to approve ZDO 270 as recommended by the Planning Commission and staff.
Is there a second?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. I would point out there's one correction as mentioned by Stephen, and that is under agenda number 1, summary of changes to cross-section. It's from 4 feet to 5 feet. Make sure that the record reflects that change. Any other questions? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Now that the amendments have been approved, I'll direct staff to draft an ordinance reflecting today's decision and include it on the agenda for this board's adoption at a future business meeting. And there being no other comment, we stand adjourned. Thank you.